Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for tuning in. Today, I am talking to Dr. Escalona. He is from Manila. He is a functional MD with a master's in nutrition. And we're talking about how the health benefits and how we can help out the jiu-jitsu community. So tell us a little bit about your background, Doc.
Yeah, thanks for inviting me. Is it Iro, right?
Iro, yeah.
Iro, okay. Thanks for inviting me, Iro, and hello to everyone listening to Iro's work. You're doing good work. I reviewed a lot of your content previously. Thank you for the work and for being invited here. So I'm an MD, as what Iro was mentioning. I had my training in San Diego, took a master's in nutrition at Bastyr University, and then I proceeded to take a functional medicine certification from the Institute for Functional Medicine, which took about another 2 years. I was fortunate to be one of the first Filipino physicians to be mentored by functional medicine faculty. My mentor was Dr. Lisa Porter Perry. She's working down in San Diego, and we were working with a lot of autoimmune patients for about 2 years. Since that time, though, my practice has shifted because of personal reasons and other types of reasons from a solely autoimmune, reversing autoimmune disease type of practice to more of the neurologic, neuromuscular types of conditions. And I think that was why I started to get into this type of research, looking into the evidence basis for improving physiologic function of athletes from a molecular standpoint, uh, considering, and later on we'll dive into that, understanding the work of the mitochondria, if you're familiar with that term. It's the powerhouse of each cell.
Yep.
And how that is actually integral in every chronic disease or any disease or health spectrum that you're trying to move in and improve.
Yeah, that's where energy gets processed. Yeah.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, I'm ready to fire away, Ira, if you have any top questions.
Well, first thing is what is, because functional medicine is like still somewhat like relatively new. So for people who don't know, what exactly is functional medicine?
All right. So functional medicine is not a subspecialty. It's a model of care where we're trying to understand and treat the root cause of chronic disease. So for any condition out there, whether it's a headache, whether it's pain, whether it's chronic inflammation, a conventional physician, when I was trained previously, the question for us would be, what's the diagnosis? Clinch the diagnosis, because each diagnosis is matched with a specific therapy, whether it's a drug, a procedure, or any other therapy. For functional medicine, what we're trying to understand is this idea that every symptom or disease has a root cause. And these root causes come from a gene-environment interaction. And so when we're born, we used to think before that our genes would be 100% of the reasons why we get chronic disease. But now we're understanding that genetics plays about 20%, more or less. That's what the scientists are finding out. And that the environment called the epigenome, the things that affect your genes, contribute the other 80%. And so the 80% then would compose of internal, external environments coming from basic lifestyle stuff, nutrition, sleep, stress. You're looking at toxic exposure, looking at chronic infections that are not treated. You're looking at sleep regularity and quality of sleep. It extends all the way into the socio-genomic aspect of how patients actually have relationships that support them through life. So that creates 7 different key points of interventions. I'm going to repeat them. It's nutrition, exercise, sleep, stress management, relationships, and networks. Then the other 2 are more medical. It's more, they involve toxic exposure and chronic untreated infections.
Okay.
So those are the 7 that we kind of start to unravel and understand for each patient. And so functional medicine then, as we work on those 7, has the ability to change genetic expression to reverse certain chronic conditions. It doesn't happen for everyone, but we do have conditions that are truly reversible through this process.
Okay. That's where the epigenetics comes in, because epigenetics is gene expression, right?
Exactly. Epigenetics, yeah.
Yeah, and I know that I've heard before where they talk about the meditative state that you can actually turn on certain genes just by basically the stress level, learning how to like
Yeah.
manage your own stress. And that's
Mm.
where the nutrition comes in. And that's also where I feel like where they talk about the GI tract and how you have a set number of like something like 20 some odd thousand like genes, but then like the bacteria in your GI tract has like millions, and that actually
Yep.
affects what kind of genes. So that's where the nutrition is like an important factor to actual gene expression. So it's not just how you eat, but it's what you eat, because and then there's the bacteria in your stomach reacts to what you eat. Is that what I'm understanding?
That's actually exactly where science is at now. So if I could just segment what you were saying,
Okay.
what we used to think was that everything in our bodies were dictated by the genes in our cells. So if I have my brain cell, it has its set of genes and it creates function from the sets of genes. However, scientists have expanded that concept. What they've understood now and found out was that there's about 100 trillion bacteria, what you're mentioning, the microbiome, that's living in our intestinal tract. And so if you eat food, if you are subjected to stress, if you get exposed to a toxin, they first go through the microbiome. And that microbiome processes all those signals and sends signals into the body. So if you think about it, it's like sifting through, and you have different filters.
Gotcha.
First filter is your microbiome, then they create signals, and then the second filter is your own genetic processes, and then that gets turned on and off by the signals from the microbes. And so now we're seeing, with the way that the world is set up, with all the antibacterial agents, with the way we're eating, it changes the microbiome diversity. Meaning, if I were living in the US, instead of having 20 different cultures, you have your Asian, Hispanic, European, you have one or two dominant ones that come on top. And that's no good for any type of situation. And so when that happens to a microbiome, when there are a couple of dominant signatures, then they take hold of all the signals that are being created. The other microbes can't
Interesting.
balance out those signals. And so if I were, for example, hit by, let's talk about COVID. If you're hit by the COVID infection, or if you're hit by some other viral infection, bacterial infection, and you don't have the balance of the other bacteria or viruses, they can't protect you against this one agent. There's too many of them. And that's where disease starts to come in. And we haven't identified what microbe signal creates what diseases, but what we're seeing is that a bunch of different signals will start to turn on certain genes that create inflammation. And that's well researched. The signal in the gene is called the NFKB. It's pretty scientific. It's NFKB, NF-kappa B. But that's just a scientific term for the master regulator of inflammation. And once you turn on this NF-kappa B, inflammation starts to roll.
Yeah, now we're
And
running into that inflammation. Once inflammation goes in, you have all kinds of issues. Uh,
exactly, exactly.
Correlated inflammation to everything. I mean, aging, cancer, joint issues,
Yeah.
arthritis. Wow, I didn't realize. Wow, that's interesting.
so, so now this master regulator, the NF-kappa B, is where most of the scientific research has come into. What are all the interventions across the 7 that we had mentioned that will either turn up or turn down this NF-kappa B signaling? And that's where nutrition comes in. That's where exercise comes in, because there are a lot of research and meditation where NF-kappa B is actually turned down when you do meditation. NF-kappa B is turned down when you take more antioxidants, curcumin, all these other wonderful things. And then the key then would be, how much signals am I putting into my body to turn up NF-kappa B? And how much signals am I putting into my body to turn down NF-kappa B? And now you have a very specific way of understanding how your body will react to the environment. And if you take it from a patient to patient perspective, so I see a lot of patients, you'll see that their threshold for activation of NF-kappa B is very different from one patient to the next. So the sensitivity is way different. And tying this way back into the jiu-jitsu perspective, into the jiu-jitsu practice and martial arts form, when I got invited to that lecture that I did last November for the Cobrina event in Manila, what they asked me was that to understand, all right, we really don't know what happens to the body before, during, and after an event or after workout. What is happening physiologically? So I started to look into the articles. That's what I had sent you. And what we're seeing is that in any match, there really is about 5 minutes of, if you're an amateur, there's 5 minutes of intense combat or exertion time. And jiu-jitsu in particular has two types of force that's being created. One is the consistent force that you have to have grip strength persistently throughout more than 30 seconds. And the other is compared to shoving force, where you have to get people off you for a brief number of seconds. And what we're seeing...
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. And what we're seeing in the literature is that in these short spans of 5-minute workouts or intense workouts in competition, the body starts to, number one, use a lot of carbohydrates because it needs to generate a lot of heat and energy. And number two, it starts to create damage. Damage in the sense of not just the muscles being damaged, but because the body is creating so much energy, just like a car would create exhaust, the mitochondrial system creates some form of exhaust whenever you produce energy through that system. And so as you increase the time that you're competing in jiu-jitsu, you increase the energy requirement and you increase the internal toxicity from the energy that's being created.
Yeah, it's a byproduct of ATP production, through the mitochondria.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. So now the question would be, in that setting, what would then be nutritional interventions to mitigate the byproduct? We call the byproduct ROS, reactive oxygen species, but we just call them toxins just for everyone to understand it better. And so what would you then provide pre-match, during, interim match, and post-match to be able to recover quickly? And we can go into that later on, but maybe you have some questions that are floating in your mind right now that you wanted to ask.
No. So far, I'm understanding what you're saying. I was correlating back to this. It's kind of, it's funny how you, like, scientifically, you're talking about the carbohydrate thing where, just talking amongst jiu-jitsu practitioners, it's almost your body is requesting carbohydrates. Like, no matter how you try to actually eat, you can't avoid, like, you just feel better when you're training, if you're training consistently to, like, up your actual carbohydrates. So I was having a discussion with someone earlier that I was just trying to explain to her that, that's why, like, if you look at MMA fighters or like really high level jiu-jitsu people, is their body fat is not as lean as it possibly could because of the style of training that they're doing, because it's a high level anaerobic stage that they just need to tap into the fat source to maintain it, as well as they need an excessive amount of carbohydrates to kind of feed the machine in order for them to do it, consistently. Because when we're training, one thing is the actual, like, sporting event, the actual competition, where, it's like you said, 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever high level there is. But when you're doing training, you're putting in 5-6 minute rounds, 8 to 10 rounds on a daily basis. So we're talking almost an hour every single day of like high intensity conditioning. Yeah. And you can't couple that with a trim diet of, like, low carbohydrates because you want to try to get lean. You just won't function.
Yeah.
You can mentally,
you're gonna burn out. Yeah.
You're gonna burn out, exactly. And then it causes other issues. Then all of a sudden you're like, I got hurt doing a takedown. It's like, did you really get hurt, or was it really that your body was just so fatigued because you're not feeding it the proper fuel, because you're trying to trim down that last little couple pounds that you want to trim down?
That's exactly where, that's exactly what I was trying to share. You're really know a lot about this stuff. Maybe just to add to what you had just mentioned. So the mitochondria, those powerhouses of the cells, are most abundant in 3 organs in the body. The first organ is the brain, the second is the liver, and the third is the muscle system. And what we know of the mitochondria is that they undergo this function of fusion and fission, right? we can't grow new mitochondria, but we can fuse them together to produce more energy. If they have a what we call mitochondrial fission, where they have to split and they have less heads in one mitochondria, they'll produce less energy. Apart from fusion and fission, the ways to induce fusion and fission are very set, and there are actually a lot of neurologists learning to do this for the brain for post-stroke patients. We do it for our patients here. And what we know is similar to what you guys do on a daily basis. When you trigger the nerve to turn on, when you trigger it to create energy, that will trigger fusion, mitochondrial fusion, to create more energy, and that strengthens the energy capacity. If, however, your system has a couple of things that will stop energy production, fission will happen because they have to produce less energy from that perspective. And so the set points for fusion and fission are, first of all, does the person have stable oxygenation throughout? If you have fluctuations in oxygenation, then you'll have fluctuations in the energy production potential. So
Okay,
the first things that we look into for
so wait, hold on before you go on that, because that's a good point. So what dictates that fluctuation of oxidation?
yeah. So the first thing that we check actually is a complete blood count and the sizes of the red blood cells. Looking into very basic iron panels. I've seen a couple of patients, a number of patients, having normal red blood cell counts. But when we run the iron panel, looking into ferritin, serum iron, ferritin, and total iron binding, every marker is deficient. Simply because iron is pretty weirdly distributed in the body. When you have less than 20% of iron in the body, that's the only time your red blood cells will come down in number. And most doctors miss this out. And so what we look at actually in the red blood cell testing are the sizes. You'll see there a marker called mean cell volume, mean cell hemoglobin concentration. These will dictate the size of the cell and the amount of hemoglobin it's allowed to carry. Low iron will lead to smaller cells. And so smaller cells, lower oxygen carrying capacity, meaning no matter how much you're going to push, that's just a nutrient deficiency that's not going to get you over to
So
the
then
next stage.
the logical question it would be to then ask is, then what about women? Because doesn't the average woman, because of their menstrual cycle, usually have like a lower iron count in their blood?
Yep. It does. They do. And so there are a couple of ways to pick up low iron in the body. The most sensitive physical exam are pale eye conjunctiva or underneath the eye beds. The next would be if you're familiar with people who've smoked most of their lives, you'll see that the edges of their nails are clubbed or curved.
Yeah,
And so that's a setting, you've seen people like, that's a setting of consistently low oxygen in the tips of the fingernails. Another sign would be if you press on the nail bed, it should typically be colored pink, but if you press on it, it's going to turn white. If it's already white and you press on it, it just maintains that white color, then that's that's a sign or a physical exam that may point towards some form of iron deficiency or low oxygen carrying capacity for the patient. Different people have different types of oxygenation issues, but that's one basic one that we're trying to mitigate. The other one is stable blood sugar. The moment the person's blood sugar fluctuates,
before you go on to the next point. So then,
sure.
The normal deduction would be then part of the diet for people that are jiu-jitsu competitors is to make sure that you have a diet that's high in iron,
or some form of iron, which is a weekly base, some form. So the best form would be liver. If you're familiar with organ meats and livers,
okay.
That is actually a very good source.
Okay.
Which we do provide for patients, and we see that it helps out. However, if a patient does have an iron deficiency, it's nice to know the level so you can test it if you have access to it, and then correct it, and typically stays on that level after you correct it.
I got you. Okay. So I'm sorry. I'm sorry that I interrupted. So you're talking about
No,
sugar.
no, it's fine. It's fine. You can cut the call anyway. So the next one is really the understanding that blood sugar also fluctuates the energy. So if I eat a sugary, I don't know, sugary meal, it's gonna jump up, pick up my blood sugar. My insulin will kick in, and it's gonna store the blood sugar, and it's gonna drop my blood sugar after 40 minutes.
Mhm.
And so it's always nice to mix carbohydrate rich foods with fiber or protein sources,
Mhm.
because after glucose, it's protein that the body's gonna use up next, and then it's gonna shift to the fatty source of energy after protein. Any questions with that? Does that make
Yeah.
sense?
So
Very basic stuff, I think that.
so the sugar thing, I've read a couple things about that insulin reaction is like the major component of why the majority of us gain weight, especially now with
Mm-hmm,
society the way it is. Um,
mm-hmm,
for the jujitsu person, the average jiu-jitsu person is actually pretty healthy relatively,
mm-hmm.
because you can't
Yeah.
really you can't eat poor and maintain your energy levels while you're training, unless you talk to like a lot of the, like, if I've been with a lot of like the high level jiu-jitsu guys, and their foundational diet is pretty well rounded, but then I'm assuming, and I don't know, it could be a combination of them being young, them being here in the United States, and then also in combination with them training. But probably about 40% of their diet is an excessive amount of calories, like where they're eating
Mm-hmm.
just I wouldn't say like poor food, but very rich food, and like in large quantities. And then you see them in the gym, and they're relatively lean, and I feel
Mm-hmm.
like it's in combination that they're eating, their body's obviously requesting the amount of calories that they're consuming, and then
Yeah.
they have their foundational like core diet, whatever that is, and then the outside is like, whatever, I just finished training like 2-3 hours, I can kind of
Yeah.
splurge and have like a slice of pizza, and a hamburger and some fries, because I just need the calories. So
Yeah.
for me, the question is that how to, because that's also not good for you in the long run. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's good for you now. It feels good. It helps you recover. I think it gives you the energy for you to keep training. But that's because when you're 20, your body is able to process all that the poor food
Yeah.
you're consuming. But
You're
there's
right
got
on
to
the
be
money,
negative
right?
effects to it down the road. You know what I mean? There's got to be something.
Yeah.
There's got to be some effect of it, like in 10 years from today, where you're not going to be able, it's going to put a lot of stress on your body to process all that poor food that you're having. So then it comes down to the question is like, how does someone who is at that high level training or is training quite a bit, like, find that gap of calories where it's like, okay, my body's obviously requesting extra fuel. What can I do in order for me to be able to up my calories and not have to consume like poor food? Does that make sense? Like not
Yeah.
poor, like economic poor, like poor, like not healthy food.
So this is a really good topic. There are a couple of things I wanted to comment about what you had just said. So the first is, before I answer the uh, quality question, right? So what's the food quality type of question? The thing that I wanted to share is that there's this concept that was created a couple of years back called organ reserve. And what you were mentioning, where people are eating, they're very active, but they don't eat as well, and that they don't recover as well in the next 10 years, plays into that concept of organ reserve. And organ reserve is this idea that when we were born, there's a maximum capacity of healthy cells that our body has, right? So let's say the liver has an organ reserve of 100. The moment you get drunk the first time, maybe in high school, or maybe grade 7, or whatever grade you got
Whatever.
drunk the first time, tried out alcohol, um, you might have reduced your organ reserve by a couple of points. But in your earlier years, you'd wake up with no hangover, and you could do it for 3 days straight, right? If you recall those times in our lives where
Yeah.
you could get drunk and kind of recover. The longer your recovery time, the more organ reserve is depleted in the system, is what the scientists are talking about. And so, if you're mentioning this highly trained athlete, he's doing his daily training, has a core meal plan, and then eats crappy stuff, my language, crappy stuff outside, then what would happen then in the long run is that, for firstly, his organ reserve would start to come down, because it's true that the cells start to have some wear and tear. Second, those types of foods will start to shift his microbiome, which we had talked about previously. And in that shift in the microbiome, typically, if you have more carbohydrate heavy, more processed food items, you shift toward cultivating more infectious types of bacteria. And so these infectious types of bacteria can generate that NF kappa B that we were mentioning and start to create inflammation in different parts of the body. But it takes years for that to happen, because you then have to have other types of, I guess, triggers to shift the microbiome. Key triggers are stress, antibiotics, surgical procedures. So that's for that segment. Now, when we talk about functional nutrition, I'll put in the concept of functional nutrition. We're always looking into the idea that food isn't just about calories, that food is about genetic messaging. It's about the language that your cells need to turn on different functions. And so we look into this concept called the PFC MVP, right? So PFC MVP stands for the macronutrients, so proteins, fats, and carbohydrates. Do we have an adequate amount of those three? And then MVP stand for the minerals, vitamins, and the phytochemicals. And so whenever we eat, do we have these 6 factors in each meal? Um, and that's where actually we're trying to understand that, where we can understand that if we do have those 6, we're able to now mitigate the damage that's being done on a daily basis from exposure. Does it make sense? Did it make sense?
Yeah,
Did it
yeah.
answer? Yeah. Okay.
Basically,
Good.
food
Good.
food is medicine, is what basically you're saying. In other words,
Yeah.
from what you just finished explaining, it just sounds like in order for your body to heal properly, because that's basically what life is stress, physical stress, mental stress, whatever stress, and that the food that you eat, if you eat it in the correct amounts, the microbiome then has a genetic expression, and then from there it helps the body actually kind of recover from the actual stress or whatever it may be,
Yeah.
whether it's physical stress, mental stress, whatever type of stress.
Exactly. Yeah, that's actually where you want to be. The other thing that we had uncovered with mitochondrial work, and this is mostly from the work that I had done in autism, that I'm doing now for kids with autism. If you think about it, autism is low mitochondrial energy production in the brain. And so when you have these Brazilian jiu-jitsu athletes trying to power up the mitochondria in the muscle system and in the brain, it's similar to how we work with kids. The thing that we look into the most are nutrients to produce energy in that mitochondria, and the nutrients that will shuttle energy into the mitochondria. And so key nutrients would be, I mentioned iron, B vitamins, because they're the ones that turn on the ATP machinery. You have magnesium, you have zinc, you have the shuttle for fats called carnitine, and the fish oils, the fatty acids. A lot of work being done now on the MCT diets. If you're familiar with those, people taking coconut oil, people taking a lot of fats. What we're seeing now is that for some people, there's a genetic deficit to bring the fats into the cells, coming from an issue with carnitine metabolism. So carnitine is actually a shuttle that brings the fat into the mitochondria to be processed. And carnitine is abundant in meat products. Carnitine is abundant in a lot of these things, but we still get a lot of these advanced testing called advanced test results from what we call organic acid tests showing a deficit in carnitine. And the reason that the experts are thinking of is that there are about 5 genes that will carry carnitine in the body. Most of these guys don't have these carnitine genetics. And so you would then need to supplement them with carnitine at the end of the day. And this is just one nutrient, right? That's just carnitine we're talking about. It can happen for any nutrient on the spectrum. And so I guess what I'm trying to share here is that the field of nutrition, and I guess molecular nutrition, functional nutrition, is headed into this world where precision is the name of the game, where we're going to understand how your particular body will respond to certain foods, and how do we now move you through the goals that you'd like to have for the jiu-jitsu work that you want to do.
Okay. Um, so you sent me an article talking about also the heart rate responses. Can you speak a little bit on that? Because I know that I have a friend of mine who he's basically somewhat, he's got a master's in exercise science. He owns a personal training certification, but he's also a professional cyclist as well.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, and he was telling me, he was kind of describing like how to approach if you wanted to design like a cardio program for like a jiu-jitsu athlete. And it's like, it's not necessarily, it's not about so much about the training zone. It's about how fast you can recover from the training zone. So he was explaining to me that, you know, he goes in grappling and wrestling or stuff that's very high anaerobic. He goes, we get like that in cyclists when we're going uphill. But what we do is that we work on the heart recovery rate. So we kind of come up with like cardio programs that are designed so that we can be at like 80 or 90% of our maximum heart rate for hours. He's like one of the, I guess a competition that he had that he was at like, he averaged like 85% of his maximum heart rate for something like an hour and like 20 minutes when he was riding. And he goes, and that's where, when you get to the highest level of, well, again, I'm using cycling, the difference between Lance Armstrong or some of the high level athletes is that they go in spurts. So they're able to go up to that 90%, redline their heart rate, hold it for a certain amount of time, pedal back, get the heart rate down as quick as possible for them to then push it up again. And so he was kind of telling me that, like, you know, he's like, you wear a heart rate monitor, like figure out what your average heart rate is while you train, and then come up with like a program in order for you to do it. Now, that's him being a cyclist. I also talked to an athletic trainer who was a black belt in jiu-jitsu a few days ago, and he told me that there's no real, I wouldn't say not a need, but if you're doing like hard training while you're actually doing jiu-jitsu, where you feel like, let's say you're on a scale of 1 to 20 and you're getting close to that 20 almost with every roll, then there's no reason for you to do additional cardio work. But if you're not, then go ahead and complement it or supplement your actual jiu-jitsu training so that you can add in the additional cardiovascular work, because that really, when you get to that high level, or when you're doing those competitions, when you're trying to get first place, that extra 2 seconds or 5 seconds makes a huge difference.
That's it. Yeah. That's the winning 2 seconds or 5 seconds.
So I think what is your opinion on that? Like, is this something that, like, how would you approach it if you need to approach it, and what happens to actually, because I saw this a little, like I briefly read one of the articles you read, and it kind of went over like how the body reacts in that type of environment of jiu-jitsu.
Yeah. So I guess the way to answer your question, and I wouldn't know if what I'm gonna tell you would really be the most accurate thing, because I don't practice the jiu-jitsu. I'm just gonna trace kind of the molecular kind of science behind it.
Okay.
But right now the consensus is amongst us functional medicine practitioners, when we're kind of helping these high level athletes, is to track data. The more data points we have for one patient, the better you can now shift moment to moment all the factors to improve their performance. And so your friend was talking about improving performance through physical activity, like changing the routines and improving that. So if you track the data for the athlete, you would actually have enough data to understand, okay, can we push more? Is he actually hitting 90% of heart rate capacity? Or is it 85%? And at that level, at the level that you're talking about, the difference between an 82% maximal capacity versus 84, 85% maximal capacity is actually profound in the recovery phase. And so when I was actually training in San Diego, we were doing a lot of work. We did a lot of training for um, the zones that you were talking about, the understanding the zone for training. And the zones are very, very specific to the number or to the percentile of heart rate variability or the heart rate change. So if you're working on zone 2, for example, you can't go above a certain beats per minute or exercise capacity, because you won't be able to have enough recovery to do the next zone for the next day. And that would then create the training blocks for the next couple of months. I haven't done that.
Explain that a little bit, because I've actually heard that before. You're talking about HRV, heart rate variability.
Yeah.
And they're talking about where that's that kind of couples a little bit with what my friend was telling me when he's again, it goes back to him being a cyclist. He has like he has an altitude bed. He actually has
Okay.
yeah, a
Pulse
resting heart rate
oximeter.
like you see like at a hospital where that he
Yeah.
heart rate in the morning, and that dictates exactly for him how he's going to train for the day, and it dictates what it's going to do for the actual week. And then he doesn't adjust the altitude bed until his resting heart rate goes back down to the number. In other words, when he sleeps in the altitude bed, his heart rate is elevated while he actually sleeps, because obviously his breathing is labored because there's not enough oxygen in the air. But then at a certain point, the body then adapts, and then his resting heart rate is now back to normal. Then he raises the altitude again. And again, it's just basically oxygen depriving the body, so that when he does actually go out on the road, he's able then to push harder while he's actually doing it. So like I said, he basically, he's a scientist on himself. But
which is cool. Yeah, which is excellent.
But what I want to know is like, explain to me like the HRV part, because I've heard it a couple times from a couple different people, but I really don't 100% understand what that concept is yet.
Okay, so let's separate the two things. The heart rate I was mentioning in the zones is the heart rate for maximal exertion. So there's zone 1, 2, 3, 4, and you have percentages to which you can exert during the exercise event. Heart rate variability is the moment-to-moment change in heart rate response. Meaning, if I'm walking right now, let's say I'm sitting right now, and I stand up, what would be the rate of change of my heart from sitting to standing? That's heart rate variability. And typically, there are a lot of bands that you could use to pick up heart rate variability, but mostly it's effective in understanding how well your heart can adapt to moment changes in the environment. Environment can be different things, from exercise to non-exercise. And so what we know is that as you increase heart rate variability, so the moment-to-moment change of your heart, there's a lot of change, meaning your heart can adapt to different things very quickly. Higher heart rate variabilities allow for better resting potentials in the body, or better rest for the body during sleep and recovery. Heart rate variability is typically increased through activities of meditation, breath work, rest and relaxation types of things, and so, or imagery. And the institute that's actually working on this is the Institute for Heart Math, if you're familiar with that concept. Heart Math is in Northern California in Santa Rosa. And very interesting work that these guys are doing. They're looking into the heart rate variability of a person and the magnetic field that it creates around them to induce change to other heart rate variabilities. It's pretty amazing stuff. So what they were looking into and what they tested, one of the papers was this owner of a pet who really loved the pet, and they saw that as the pet would be nearer to the owner, the heart rate variability would improve. Similar to the second experiment was a husband and wife, and what they asked the husband and wife to do was to say mean things to each other. And as they said mean things, their heart rate variabilities went off sync. as they started to create appreciation for each other and to give words of affirmation, their heart rate variability starts to sync together.
It's amazing. That's
It's,
cool.
it's pretty cool stuff. Yeah, you can check out the work from the Heart
Yeah,
Math Institute, Santa Rosa. But so now we're seeing that heart rate variability is one good measure for recovery whenever you're trying to do certain things, or how much stress you're under, how much recovery you have. And then the for the exercise part, it's really the zones to create that improvement in 1 or 2 percentile scores for the oxygenation of the body. I hope that makes sense. I just went
no, 100%
totally
that makes sense.
technical.
Yeah, and I totally understand it. Like the way I remember learning was this is a new term that I've just, again, it's a heart rate variability. I've always thought it was the heart recovery rate, and that was what was important. In other words, if you're at 80% and 1 week and you're back down to 40% in 1 minute, and then next week you're at 80% and you're down to 40% in 50 seconds, you're doing good. Basically,
Yeah,
your heart is able to actually kind of recover faster. But what you're saying is that it's not only just that recovery, but now they're actually coming out with ways of, it's the variance of up and down,
yeah,
and the better it's
exactly.
able to go up and down, the more, the easier it is for your body to recover from the stress of
Yeah,
life, whatever that activity may be.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah,
And one of the things
exactly.
that I listened to, and the guy was saying that, not one of the guys that was explaining the HRV, it was like a short seminar, and he was saying that to not track it like 24/7, that it's too much information, that you want to kind of pace out how you do it, so that you want to do it like once a day or early in the morning before your body actually starts moving, so that it's at a resting position, kind of like what you used to, or at least when 20 years ago when I started the fitness industry, was just, basic resting heart rate. Like what do I do? Take my resting heart rate.
Yeah,
Do I do the activity? Do I do the
yeah, we're
activity or
banned.
not? You do the activity or not. You know what I mean? So it's kind of like, it seems like it's the same principle, but just more expansive now. It's more detailed. Like, okay, well, that
Yeah,
HRV over a week is going to tell you exactly what you should be doing the next week, and so on and so forth.
and there are a lot of wearable devices that track this now. I believe the Apple Watch can track it, but the ones that I've used personally is this item called BioStrap. BioStrap is a heart rate variability measure. You wear it mostly when you sleep, and you'll see the variability that you have on a night per night type, and then it's gonna tell you if you had good variability, then you're able to push yourself the next day. The other wearable device that a couple of golfers I think use, because I play golf, that's kind of my sport. There's this device called Whoop, if you're familiar, WHOOP. It's made in the US. It kind of tracks the moment to moment heart rate and allows for rest and recovery to be detailed in the app. But again, I think that when we started to look at the industry of wearable devices and where science was headed about a year and a half ago, it was one of our conferences. What we're seeing is that every person can be allowed to train in their most optimal kind of situation, because there's a lot of things now that can capture data. And so, because we have phones, we have watches, we have all these other wearable devices, um, the next thing then would be grabbing all the data in a cloud, or in kind of a format that a clinician or some person would be able to use, and then they could really tweak it to become very precise, for athletes like yourself.
Yeah, I've actually heard of that. I remember someone else talking about that. Another physician talking about that, and how they were doing, like, I don't know how many thousands of people, because of the wearable devices, that allows them to have more data, and the more data they have, they're able to like isolate certain issues and non-issues,
Yeah,
and how they can actually dictate like the individual care, because they have so much 24/7
it's
data
just
now.
data.
It's all
Yeah.
data. You start to see patterns when you have enough
That's
data.
I believe data is more expensive than oil. That was the latest kind of economic stuff that was
I
coming up.
mean, man, they do it with social media. I mean, look at Facebook bought
Yeah.
WhatsApp for $20 billion because not for any other reason other than they just wanted data. They wanted to know who was on WhatsApp so that they can have more information.
Mm.
Okay, so we talked about a good portion of nutrition. We talked about the HRV. Um, then we come to recovery. So how would you then? What are good modalities for someone who is training quite a bit to recover quite a bit? Let's say on the athlete side and also the average Joe, because there's other stress factors. Athlete deals with the stress of competition and heavy training. The average Joe deals with one, training jujitsu, as well as having a wife, a kid, or two kids, and a career.
Yeah.
And then it's like external, like work life that actually gives their stress. So what are like some
Mm.
modalities that you think will help like the average jujitsu practitioner that to help the, because I feel like there isn't, there hasn't been a priority to recovery yet because they don't see that if you recover better, you train better. They just
You
think
train
that
better. Yeah.
they think that train more is going to make me better. And I'm not saying that training more isn't going to make you better, but you also have to recover just as fast as much as you train, because the next time that you train, you're going to train harder, better, faster, because you gave your body enough recovery in order for you to be able to do that. So I'm assuming the very
Yeah.
primary one that you think is probably nutrition. What
Yep.
would be another?
Yep. Totally.
Nutrition is number one, I would say.
Uh, Meditation, having a form of breathing technique or exercise you can do regularly.
Okay.
We used to think that we take breathing for granted, but we've had patients having low oxygen carrying capacity that once they develop a 5 minute, twice a day, once a day type of breathing, they just listen on some free app or something. It starts to allow their brain to shift away from a stressed brain to a more relaxed brain. And that shift allows for more insight to happen. I understand that jiu-jitsu is a very mental sport as much as it is physical, because you're trying to make quick decisions, moment to moment quick decisions. And when we were kind of looking into the idea of insight and the idea of having a good new idea or breakthrough in practice, you need to have your body shift into a non-stressed state for new ideas to come in. And so if a person is in a setting of go go go, gotta do tasks 1 to 20 without any insight break or breathing technique in between, they don't get the brain that isn't allowed to have time to do problems on its own. And so you won't get those, I guess, moment to moment decisions.
Yeah, there'll
I
be
guess
a
you won't
delay.
train to do very, very good moment to, yeah.
Yeah, there'll be a
The
little
other
bit of
thing
a delay.
that we the other thing is that every time you do an exertion exercise that you're working hard, the recovery should only be up to 72 hours. If your recovery lasts longer than 72 hours, that means you have a problem with mitigating inflammation or
Wait,
there's a nutritional issue.
say that one more time. So we're talking a 72, the 72 from any type of physical exertion, or you're talking about from like one specific event?
So so you're cutting a little bit, but
Yeah.
I heard the
So,
question. So what I'm trying to say is that just to clear it up, anytime a person does a strenuous exercise or activity, the body should be able to recover within 72 hours.
gotcha.
If the body recovers further than the 72 hours, so 73 hours, 74, or greater than 3 days, that means the body isn't able to manage the repair sequences on time. And there's a deeper issue to why that's happening.
Okay.
And typically, the jujitsu practice entails a lot of force from muscular strength. But what people don't understand is that we're also using our ligaments and connective tissue. You need it to stretch, elongate, and that has a lot of mitochondria as well. And so if then you have lower mitochondrial energy production from nutritional issues or a toxin, then those joints would become less lax and would be prone to tears, or the muscles would then have less energy capacity during the exercise, or more pain over the 72 hours. Does it make sense? I hope I'm making
Yeah, no,
sense
no,
there.
no, it totally makes sense. Yeah, it kind of couples a little bit with what the functional range conditioning. It talks about the strength training at the end ranges of the muscle tissue so that you can increase the sacromeres, which then increases the pulling force of the actual muscle on the joint structure. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and that's kind of like, I've talked to like a couple of mobility people, and we were discussing about how the joint strength training brings the actual joint stronger, which in turn makes the actual muscle stronger because it's able to pull harder
Mm.
on each end of
Yeah, and
on each
from
tendon.
the anchors.
Yeah,
Yeah,
from
that's
the
true.
actual anchors.
Yeah.
Um,
So for me, the things that I would actually like to share is to give enough time for rest. Have your rest days. It's tough not to have rest days.
so
Um,
wait. So that's the key question, because there's two, the factor that I have is how much rest is enough rest. Like how does
mhm,
how does an athlete, because here's where I run into, like, where there's the even the average jujitsu person is going to go 2 to 4 times a week. Let's say they're a weekend warrior jujitsu player. They're still going to go 2 to 4 times a week unless they just stop going. Then you have like the athlete guy that's doing 6 to 7 days a week.
mhm.
It's like how does that guy figure out
When to rest?
when
Yeah,
to
that's
rest?
true.
At what point does
Yeah,
he know other than to rest, other than to just listen to his body? But then it goes to that psychological factor of like, do I take a day off? Because usually the higher level athletes are younger, so they have a little bit of an ego, a little bit more
yeah,
testosterone in them, where they're like, like, the pain is good. I need you to just man up and keep training. But
yeah.
like, is that like will over smarts? Like, you know what I mean? Like, I like, how does that person like learn how to listen to their body so that they know, oh, well, yeah, it's a good day to rest if it's not a good day to rest. You know what I mean?
Yeah, yeah. It's tough to answer that question without data, I think. That's my perspective. And so there are ways to understand if your body needs to rest from a molecular standpoint or from a data tracking standpoint. A couple of lab tests that we actually run for a couple of the athletes that come in are standard blood work, looking for inflammation, complete blood counts. You're looking for resolution of bruises within, again, those 72-hour window. You're looking for also, if they do have those wearable devices, you're looking for the quality of sleep that they're getting. And if the heart rate variability during sleep is lower on average, then they need to rest the next day. So we're looking at laboratory markers. You can look into markers for inflammation. They were in the articles that I had sent you. I'm not going to go into kind of the details of what those are, but there are markers. You're looking into resolution of inflammation or pain, resolution of bruises within 72 hours. You're looking into the kind of the sleep patterns and variability of heart rate during sleep. If the variability starts to decrease, the body's too fatigued to go into the deep sleep. The body isn't too fatigued to go into recovery sleep. So you'd need to spend more time resting the next day. Uh, Other than that, it's actually a tough question to answer. What you just asked,
Yeah.
because
Well, but you did a good job
yeah,
answering.
a lot of people.
From what I got from you is basically, obviously, your number one key is going to be nutrition. Um, then you got to listen
There
to
are
your
markers
body.
for that. Yeah.
Yeah, nutrition is number one. Then you got to listen to your body. You got to get adequate sleep. You got to watch your heart rate variability, or at least track it so that you know that if it's on the low side, you have to then, while you sleep,
Ease
then
out.
you have
Yeah,
to take the
you
next
have to
day
ease.
off.
Yeah.
And then periodically, if you want to be 100% scientific about it, periodically go and get your blood markers done. So
Get some blood work. Yeah,
get some blood work
that's it.
done to kind of check your inflammation and make sure that your body's actually able to reduce,
Process it. Yeah,
process the inflammation that you're actually kind of getting.
that's right. Yeah, wow. You can get a PhD in this stuff, man. How long have you been doing this work?
I've been doing fitness for a while, man.
Wow.
Never. I was briefly thinking about getting into the medical field. I don't do well with
Books.
like no, I don't do well with like sick people. Like
Oh, got
I
it.
can deal with like healthy people that are trying to be healthier, or like, but I tried it. I kind of like, I actually did something where I went and saw a friend of mine that was an exercise physiologist. I used to teach for a personal training certification. And
Oh,
she used to
hey.
come in and she would teach the heart rate stuff. And
Mhm.
she invited me to her hospital one time, and I went over there, and I kind of like followed her around and everything. I was like, yeah, no, thank you.
Tough. It's tough, man. Yeah, hospital work is just tough. That's why I left. I'm running my own clinic now. Just don't go back to the hospital.
So one last question, because I'm not 20, and so
Sure.
I want to kind of ask for anybody that might be watching that is a little bit older, is the effects of aging. Aging's obviously a
Oh yeah,
problem.
that's a
Yeah, the
good
effects of
question.
aging and training. That's one thing that I've noticed that I absolutely hate, is that because I've been so active all my life, that I'm starting to feel like just my body, like I have to be a little bit more on point with my diet. I
Mhm.
can't really take days off, because if I take days off, I get very lazy. I atrophy quite quickly,
Mhm.
meaning that if I don't do some type of actual weight bearing exercise, my muscle tissue gets, I wouldn't say deflated, but it gets softer.
Mhm.
And I know it's correlated to aging. When I get sore now, the delayed onset muscle soreness lingers a little longer. It doesn't,
Mhm.
where before I used to work out and it would take 24 to like 48 hours. Now it's like 48 to 72 hours, just
Yeah,
depending
you're
on.
hitting the window.
Yeah. I mean, that's kind of the range. I've also, just with time as well, I've learned how to listen to my body. So some of the stuff that you're talking about scientifically, I kind of do on my own. Like, I can
Yeah,
tell if I have
intuitively.
a hard day of training, when I go to sleep, like I can tell the next morning, like, wow, I really did not sleep well. And I
Yeah.
know to not train as hard the next day. But that's just, with time that you kind of learn your own body. So
Mhm.
what are things could people like me that go, okay, well, like I want to try to continue as close as I can to what I used to train when I was 20, but obviously I'm no longer 20,
Mhm.
to be able to kind of mitigate some of those issues.
Yeah. So the work on aging was actually well, the work that I follow on aging is by this doctor in Australia. His name's Michael Fennick. So really a brilliant guy. He worked for I believe it was the World Health or the UN, and his main line of work before was he was a radiation biologist. Crazy stuff. So he was working on the impact of radiation on cellular function and what happens to the cell. He did that for about 20 years, I think, or 30 years, and then shifted into just the cell and how damaged the cell would then would change function. The reason why he went through that track is because after about X years of working with radiation on the cell, he came to the conclusion that radiation induces cell damage, right? So it induces DNA damage. But when he looked into all the other factors that could induce DNA damage, he said, well, anything can induce DNA damage. Nutrition can induce DNA damage. Exertion can induce DNA damage. Heat, radiation. And so he started to look into all the factors to reduce DNA damage. And so what he then found out was that aging in general is DNA damage dependent. Right? So I'm going to repeat that. Aging is DNA damage dependent. In that concept, if you then are able to reduce DNA damage or you're able to improve DNA repair on a timely basis, you will slow or even stop the process of aging moving forward. So then we take your story as an example. You've been through a pretty active lifestyle, pretty rigorous. You competed a lot. You had a lot of damage from exercise stress, maybe, or the turnover of muscle repair and kind of repair and recover, damage and repair, recovery, damage, repair, recovery. So as you age, one of the key things that you'd like to look out for are nutrients for repair, which are vitamin B2. There are ways to test vitamin B2. Look into the process called methylation, which are the vitamins of B9, B12, and B6. And then to always have a minimum of 2.5 grams of BCAA in your diet every time you work out. Minimum 2.5 grams. Apart from that, you're doing all the good stuff. So you're doing the healthy eating, the non-processed food lifestyle. But if you're able to optimize those sets of nutrients together with the antioxidants that produce glutathione, you're gonna dramatically improve DNA repair and reduce the damage that's being done to them on a daily basis. Then also the idea that as you age, you clear toxins when you sleep. And so that would be an integral part of your recovery phase.
Sleep.
And you sleep a lot. You get a lot. Give a lot of time for sleep, or
Well, yeah, now because it's like work is a little bit off right now because of this whole COVID thing. But
yeah, it's
yeah,
crazy.
like I had to kind of adjust how like even my training, I had to stop training the in New York where I know Cato. They have like the advanced jujitsu class like at 8 o'clock at night or 7:30 at night. And I had to stop that class because it was so intense that by the time I got home at like 9 o'clock, 9 p.m., 9:30, 10 o'clock, midnight, 1 o'clock in the morning, I'm still kind of amped from the actual workout. And then I have to wake up and work at 6 o'clock in the morning. So I had to kind of cut that class because it was just too much. Like my body was just too hyped up to go to sleep, and then it was affecting my sleep. So I 100% understand that. But I'm seeing like a common theme when it comes to the nutrition. It's like iron because of for oxygen, B vitamins, magnesium, zinc, fish oil. But even the ones that you said right now, the B2, B9, obviously it's still under
B vitamins.
B vitamins.
Yeah.
And then just adding the BCAA. One last question before we kind of head out, like a couple things more about nutrition.
Mm-hmm.
Is it what's your opinion on dairy
Mm-hmm.
and beef?
Okay. So dairy would depend on where you're coming from in the world, because certain populations can't process dairy. Asians, for example, 99% of Asians just can't digest dairy. Some
Really?
of the European descent individuals can process dairy, so they don't have as much a response. So that's the first kind of answer to that question. But there are layers to the answer to the questions because it depends on where the dairy is produced as well. If the dairy is produced in highly processed cow factories, there's a lot more hormones and a lot more antibiotics that come into the milk. And so that would then lead to the issues that we've had happen. Mostly dairy issues would be GI, gastrointestinal. But on the plus side, dairy is a very good medium to grow probiotics of lactobacilli category. And so if you're cutting all dairy, better make sure you're getting some other stuff to put the lactobacilli bacteria in your guts.
I was waiting for
case
that.
to case.
Yeah, that's exactly
Case
that.
to case.
Probiotics. Yeah, that was I was just that's kind of where I was leaning because I know that, like, to me, like, it doesn't make, for me, just logically, like, why would a human being be drinking baby milk from a cow?
Yeah.
If you really think about it, that's basically what it is. It's basically breast milk for a baby cow that is, you're not a cow and you're not a baby. So like for me, logically, it doesn't really make sense, even though I like dairy quite a bit. You know, I'm a heavy cheese eater, but I understand why there's like that stigma of like why dairy is kind of bad for you or why dairy is not the best thing for you. But the
There
biggest
are
thing is the
symptoms.
probiotics.
Also, there are symptoms. If you can't take the dairy, you do get symptoms. You're gonna get gas, bloating. You're gonna get some digestive issues, some
Right.
skin issues, or asthma.
And then,
Going into your probiotic, yeah, go ahead, please.
no, go ahead. No, the
Um,
probiotics. I just was like that. That's the important one is the probiotics, which is basically what it promotes good gut health, which goes
yeah.
back to what we started at, which is
So with the probiotics, I think to give a kind of a brief explanation of how these things work, um, the scientific community has come to the understanding that probiotics are tourists. So you take the probiotic, it stays in your gut for 2 weeks, and then they go out. And so just like tourists, they come into the country for 2 weeks. They have a good impact on the economy, right? It improves the economy and all that. And then they leave and then, all right, they're gone. And so we now kind of try to maneuver patients' guts by giving the probiotics during the time that they need them when the diet isn't set. And then giving prebiotics with probiotics to hopefully allow the probiotics to seed into the gut. And then they start eating the prebiotic fiber and they start to colonize within the area. Our hopes that it would colonize. In the work that was done in UCSD, it was the lab of Rob Knight. What they found out was that with a minimum of 2 weeks, you're going to see microbial change with a minimum of 2 weeks food change, removing the processed stuff, putting a lot of fiber from vegetables. But the changes will only be permanent if you maintain the change for 6 to 12 months.
interesting. Oh no.
I think.
Yeah, you froze a little bit right there. Give it a second.
Iro?
There we
Oh, there
go.
you go.
There we go.
Yeah, we got
Okay.
cut.
Wow. So I
What did
heard
you
6 to
last year?
12 months.
Yeah, that's what the research from UCSD's currently saying, that it takes that long for the microbes to start to shift in diversity permanently. And so the diet change would need to be that long on a minimum. And so what are probiotics really for? If you look down into the research for each strain, the probiotic strains have different impacts on different inflammation signaling. And basically that's what they do. They're there to eat the food you're eating to produce better anti-inflammatory signals to the body.
Interesting. Wow. That was it. I didn't know that one.
um,
That's the first time I didn't know that one. That one I didn't know. Wow, interesting. Okay, so then we go back to the major one. This is
yeah,
basically this is for like general fitness a little bit, not necessarily for jujitsu people. Is like what's your
mm-hmm.
big picture thing with the food industry? I personally think it's getting better, but it's
Oh
still
yeah, it really
it's getting
is.
better. But like here in the, I mean, I'm not sure what it's like over there, but in the here in the United States, it's the processed food is getting less and less. It's getting a little bit more and more towards like the natural food, and all the books that I've read and things that I've seen, different opinions on nutrition and things like that. They do this and they take studies here and they do all kinds of stuff, and everybody kind of arguing like, no, the vegan is the best way, and
Yeah.
Atkins diet. The carnivore diet is now somewhat popular a little bit sometimes. So like everyone has like their own like general opinion. Obviously they all base it on somewhat of science and they kind of pick and choose which study that they're going to use. But I just think that for me, it's like the closer you get to nature, the better it is. I don't know if you froze one more time. Hello? There we go.
Oh, there you are.
Sorry about
I
that.
think we got cut. Sorry, but I think yeah.
So I left off where I left off basically saying, that everyone kind of picks and chooses their options.
Mm-hmm. It's like a religion. People are trying to
100% like
go into the.
but what I can't because I kind of because I'm kind of like nutrition is not my thing. I know that it's an important factor. So I take all the information with a grain of salt. And so the way I look at all these different books and studies and stuff like that is that the closer you get to nature, that's the way to go.
Yep, that's true.
That's basically the way it is. So it's like, there's nothing wrong with meat. Just where does the meat come from? Like, how do they stay away from processed stuff. Anything that comes in a box, don't eat it. You shouldn't be eating it. The majority of, not everything, but the majority of it. So it's like when people try to like, well, which is the best diet? I tell them, there is no best diet. There is the diet that works for you. Like what are you going to be able to stick to? And then there's like major no-nos that you're not supposed to do. Like don't eat candy. Don't eat a bag of chips every day.
Yeah.
Those are the things that like, I kind of like people don't seem to understand. And so like the food industry, like is getting better, but it's not there. And like one of the books that I just finished reading, which is kind of great so far, is it talks about how the food industry its goal wasn't to poison people. It was just trying to
make more food.
Produce more food at a lower cost. And then the side effect of that is like what we have now.
Yeah. So I completely agree with everything you just said. I have the I guess the luxury of running tests on my patients. So I get patients eating crappy food. We ask them to change their food. We do our lab testing before and after, and we see the change. But what I'd like to share from my experience is that even though we put someone on the perfect diet, no processed food, no nothing, there are still nutritional issues that come up, one or two of them, that you need to test for to pick up. That they won't be feeling any symptoms, but then when you check it, they're bordering on vitamin D deficiency. They're bordering on some form of B vitamin issue. And the reason why the body, I think, is in so much flux is because the food that we have isn't produced with the same nutrient-rich soil or the same nutrient-rich farms or fields anymore. Apart from the fact that on a daily basis, one of my teachers, mentors, Dr. Michael Stone, taught me before that the solution to pollution is dilution. And so whenever the body gets a toxin, maybe from the air that we breathe or something that we eat, your body will try to dilute it using different things. It'll try to clear it out with nutritional inputs. And so if you then have a limited source of nutrients from the things coming in, and you're still exposed to some toxins, there will still be one or two imbalances that will come out. Might not be great enough to create a symptom right now, but if you progress throughout the next 10 years, you'll pick it up eventually.
Yeah.
And so for me, that's my kind of take on it. It's not, so eat, be a whole foods kind of as much as possible. But at the same time, understanding key markers that you can routinely check on would be where the science is headed, as well as the from nutrigenomic studies, understanding your own genome and how your body starts to process the data or the nutrients from food on a genetic capacity. We're getting cut. Yeah, we keep getting. I think the video starts to get.
I think that's the universe saying that we gotta start getting close to wrapping this up.
Yeah.
This was by far one of the greatest conversations I've had in a long time.
Thank you.
Really enjoyed this.
Me too.
So yeah, hopefully what I'm probably gonna do, maybe if you're up to it, I would love to be able to read a lot of these articles that you sent me, and maybe we set up another call down the road to discuss a different article.
No problem.
Because this is specifically, the articles that you sent me were specifically for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu.
For Jiu-Jitsu, yeah, that's why I pulled them out for you.
Yeah, so I would love to be able to kind of dissect it and be able to like come up with questions that I can ask you to kind of clarify for me.
Sure.
Clarify for the community.
For sure.
Escalona, Dr. Escalona, I really appreciate this. I'll say
thank you, Iro.
You, man.
Yeah.
It was a pleasure chatting with you, and we'll be talking soon, bud.
Yeah, I know it's late there, and thank you for taking the time at this time. But
I
let's talk
appreciate you
soon.
you taking the time out of your day. Thank you so much for meeting me.
Okay,
Okay.
have a good one, and take
Likewise.
care there. Bye bye.
Bye bye.